I'm going to be honest about this up front. My main love in terms of sport is boxing. So I'm quite intrigued that I know who Jake Paul is because I've never watched any of his YouTube stuff. I don't even know what he does on YouTube. I know he has a massive following. But I've started to notice on things like Twitter and YouTube this whole Dana White, Jake Paul thing going off. I've never watched any of Jake Paul's fights. I'm obviously, because I've watched lots of things like IFL TV, Geordie Extra, and behind the scenes boxing gloves, and all of those. There's so many channels, it's hard to keep up with them. So I've seen all the stuff with Tommy Fury pulling out of a fight, cracked ribs and stuff like that. I've seen, obviously, that Jake Paul has fought Woodley, knocked him out, and I've seen those clips of him knocking him out, and great punch, definitely set that up well. And I've obviously heard comments from Bisping, Tony Bellew. Interestingly, Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren have all kind of given their opinions a little less so than Dana White, but Jake Paul doesn't seem to be going after them. And I'm intrigued. Like, genuinely, this guy has my attention. And I don't know what to make of him. And when I don't know quite what to make of something, I try to look at what it is that I'm missing. Because the guy is a showman. He is the ultimate promoter, self-promoter. But it's this idea that people still think he's dumb, that he's some idiot. Jake Paul is making millions, and people like me who know nothing about him on YouTube, have never watched any of his YouTube stuff, are talking about him. Now, I love boxing, and in that sense I'm a purist, and I've always been a bit snobby when it comes to these kind of strange exhibition fights. But his business acumen, damn, that guy's smarter than me. And just for the record, people talk about he handpicks his fighters. I don't know any boxers that don't handpick their fighters. It's only when they're pushed into a corner and they're at a dead end that they start fighting people that are dangerous to them. Very, very few boxers will fight people that are a risk, a real risk. Not unless there's a shitload of money in it. You know, it's a fight that can't be avoided. And, you know, Floyd Mayweather, for one, has been accused of this often. But actually, his record has some pretty decent fighters on it. You know, you can argue Pacquiao was past his best. Yeah, but Ricky Hatton wasn't. Canelo and Alvarez was expected to give him a good test. You know, he beat Oscar De La Hoya. So I might need to check that one. But he's beaten Shane Mosley. He beat him. You know, he beat some really quality opponents in his time. And I'm now getting distracted by Floyd Mayweather. But again, because he's been caught up in the whole... But I didn't even know if that was Logan Paul or Jake Paul. That's how little I know about these two guys. But I'm starting to know who they are. And I actually have lots of admiration. And like I said, I know they can be criticised for the quality of opponent that they fought. But I bet you I couldn't beat any of his opponents. So he's doing a damn sight better job than I would. And he's making a shitload more money than you and I. He honestly is. And when I see promoters getting involved in this, you know in the back of your head they're thinking, shit, I wish I knew something about this. You know, people like Frank Warren, Eddie Hearn, and I'm not calling them out because they're great promoters, but they don't know how to do what Jake Paul does. I don't know how to do what Jake Paul does. And if you think Jake Paul is stupid, how's he got so many millions of followers on things like Instagram and YouTube? Hundreds of millions of hits and views and clicks, and the guy generates revenue. He is a fucking cash cow and a money-making machine. And he's 24 years old. When I was 24, I was getting dumped from a shitty relationship and losing my house. So he's a damn sight smarter than I am. And The whole thing the fights don't. I still have no interest in the fights. But I'm like, how has this guy got under the skin of the likes of Dana White? Because Dana White's calling him out. You know, I watched a podcast with Teddy Atlas and Dana White, and Dana White is giving this guy time. Dana White is putting Twitter stuff out on Twitter. It's like, what has Jake Paul done that's such a threat to Dana White? I know he's criticised the UFC and how it's run, and I think most people who know anything about UFC, and my knowledge is limited, agree that the fighters get shit money, and it's not a great deal. And especially when they changed, I think it was the sponsorship through Reebok, that Reebok get to sponsor the whole of the UFC, so fighters aren't allowed individual sponsorships, which obviously robbed a lot of them of revenue. But one of the things I do admire about Jake Paul in that sense is he is bringing an audience to boxing. He's bringing an audience to the UFC that otherwise wouldn't have noticed it. They wouldn't have come through the normal channels because Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren aren't talking to them. They don't. Most of those kids, young adults, whoever watch Jake Paul, haven't got a clue who those guys are. And the boxers themselves are not doing it either. They're not pulling in that crowd, that young crowd. You know, Conor McGregor did a great job for the UFC. But what do you do now? Well, Jake Paul is the one doing it, and he's not even a UFC fighter. And I'm a little suspicious that maybe the way these two are going backwards and forwards with each other, that they've teamed up in a dark room in a hotel somewhere, and maybe are almost going down the wrestling route of writing out a script and a little storyline that'll unfold in a year from now, and we'll all see the details play out. You know, is this a classic Vince McMahon move? Who knows? Who knows? You know, but when it comes to storylines and creating rivalries, nobody did it better than Vince McMahon. Nobody does it better than wrestling. You know, and you know, maybe that's what Jake Paul is bringing to the world. You know, because I remember the first time he kind of came into my preferential vision, it was fighting KSI, I think his name is. Again, another YouTuber, guy I've never heard of, don't know anything about, but I remember it was a big deal. I can't remember whose kids or teenagers it was that was talking about it, but I'd never heard of him, never watched the fight, wasn't even interested in it. Not even sure if that was Jake Paul. Was that his brother Logan? That's how little I know. But here they are, those two brothers, and now here's Jake Paul getting called out by Dana White. And I think Jake Paul is getting the upper hand. You know, because he's just like, he just keeps hitting back at him. And I think one of the big things about Jake Paul is people underestimate how smart that guy is. He comes across as a little bit of a shock jockey. He comes across as a little bit of a loudmouth. But he's a fucking smart businessman. And if you look at how he learned something on YouTube to create that fan base, to create that following, he's a smart guy. He's a smart cookie. And he's now spreading his wings a little bit. He's getting his fingers in all the pies. He's crossed. I mean, look, who else has crossed into the world of boxing and crossed into the world of MMA, UFC? I don't know anyone else that's done that. And I know, you know, I think the last fight, I don't know what it did on pay-per-view, to be honest with you, but everyone was talking about how good he hit Woodley. Who cares how big Woodley is? Woodley would still beat the shit out of 90% of the people out there. He'd certainly give me a hiding. So God knows what Jake Paul would do to me. And yeah, fair play. I'm actually, he's doing exactly what he's supposed to do. He's getting the likes of me, who've previously been cynical, because boxing is boxing, and you should stick to just doing that, and celebrities shouldn't be doing it, etc., etc. It's got me interested. I want to know the outcome now. So let's see how this unfolds. I'll update you when I know.